Okay, so how's everybody doing?
Hey there, Pete. Hanging in there.
Yeah, pretty good.
Good.
Good. So we're missing two people, so we're in pretty good shape. Um, I have a new toy, which will let me switch. Whoops. So Arun, you have to, mute yourself so I can switch screens with the push of a button here. Haha, fancy, right?
That's cool.
Yeah, well, it'll just help me when I'm trying to show things on the computer keyboard or the Midi keyboard or on my computer screen. Anyway, so we're going to be working on creating sampler instruments. Now, typically, the way that I teach that is in the lab at college using Contact, right? So we went over this a little bit 2 weeks ago, and we don't have Contact. Pro Tools has structure free in there. And it's got some limitations, but we can work within those limitations and still get the principles together. The full version of Structure is actually a very good piece of software, but nobody really uses it. I have a license for it. I think I got it at a discount a long time ago, and I don't have it installed on this computer because I want to have Structure free to teach with. And both don't live at the same time in your computer. So you guys did some editing over the last 2 weeks. And I've got a long-term game plan here for us. And I think what I'll do today is, okay. So that was a guy named Jeremy Ellis, and he's actually a pretty good keyboard player. And he was playing that on those pads, and that box that he was playing is made by Native Instruments, and it's called Machine. And basically what it does is it's hooked up to the computer and it plays samples on those pads, and he has different scenes set up, and he can switch between scene 1 and scene 2, scene 3, etc., etc. And in each scene, the samples that are under the pads are different. So that's the concept of what I want to do for this assignment that we're going to be working on. What I want you to do is you're going to be creating an 8-bar piece of music. It's going to be rhythmic based, and you're going to be using some of these samples we made. You can use other software instruments. You can use some of the recordings of the samples if you can pitch them in. In other words, you can only use 4 instances of structure, but you can have 12 or 13 instruments, as many as you want. You can use drum kits, you can use boom, you can use whatever you want, and you're going to make an 8-bar piece of music. And then what I'm going to want you to do is to make sure that it's set up in a way that you could split it into either 4-bar or 2-bar phrases, and that you have multiple mixes. So one of your mixes might just be the drum groove. Another one of your mixes might just be the drums and the bass and a keyboard. Another one of your mixes might be everything for 2 bars. And you would just go through and figure out as many different mixes as you can, and you would make each one of these mixes 2 bars long. And then you would map those onto structure, and you can perform the piece from the keyboard by triggering the samples. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to open up Pro Tools. It seems far-fetched, but it's not that difficult. Basically, what I'm doing here is I'm taking what would be the normal assignment for right now, and I'm figuring out another way for you to learn the same techniques, right? With what we have.
Can I ask a quick question about the assignment that was due today?
Yep.
What should we have named the notes that are either sharps or flats?
Sharp or flat. So D and the sharp symbol and they're all capital letters, and B, and the small case B, capital B and small case B. Right. So a small case B is a flat, and then the sharp is shift and the number 3.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yep.
But it didn't matter if we use like C and then C sharp, right? Instead of D. Like we're not doing it as if
No. D flat and C sharp are the same. It doesn't matter. It's just mapping it. The software will map it.
I mean, like scales like can't have the same note like repeat. Like you can't have a C.
Right. No, it doesn't matter for this assignment.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So you can have a C and a C sharp and an E, right? If that's your scale. It doesn't matter for this assignment because it'll map it to a C sharp or a D flat. It's the same, depending upon how you name it.
Okay.
Right.
And is it just going to automatically do it, or do we still need to assign it to that?
No, it'll automatically do it.
Just because it has the
Correct. That's why. See, this is one reason why I had you guys all naming things a certain way from the very beginning of my teaching you, because there's other reasons why it works. So let me play. I'm going to have to cut this out of the video I upload to YouTube because they may block this on me, but you'll get the general idea. So how many of you guys have heard this song? Right. So as you can see, I can totally play a different arrangement of this song from the MIDI keyboard. Now, why would I have you doing this, something as crazy as this, with something that you are creating? Well, there's a whole industry out there based on making sample packs. What are sample packs? They are audio recordings that somebody could buy, and they could be 100 kick drums. They could be different grooves. They could be like sections, like they could be a song that you've sectioned out that people can then use to construct and help their own creativity. So there is a practical value to this. Is it a big industry? I don't know. It's not the world I live in, but I do know that it's out there. And if you get good at something like this, it's just another thing that you can have in your back pocket in terms of creating revenue streams. So any questions on that? Comments? Able to follow what I'm talking about? Yay?
Yes.
Thank you.
So far, so good.
Yes.
Thank you, Huna. All right. So hard to play on this little keyboard. All right. What have I done here? This is structure free. It's found.
We can't see the screen.
Thank you, Russell. This is, now you can, correct?
Yeah, you think.
Okay, so this is structure free. And this is the GUI. And you can only have, sadly, 4 instances of this open at a time in Pro Tools. They sort of limit you with this. Logic has something called ESX24, which is a very, very full-featured sampler that you could do professional work with. That comes with the software. But this is what we've got today. So it's got this window here where you could transpose, you could pitch shift, you could set your key range, which is right in this area here. And then it's got a second page where you have a filter type. And I'll show you that in a second. You have an amplifier, which you could set up your velocity sensitivity. And you can have your amp envelope. We're not going to talk about the filter envelope right now. So let me just show you a few things. So I set, these are Woodstock chimes. These are chimes from a company up in Woodstock, New York, which is about 30 miles north of me. And I bought them for my mother like in 1989 as a Christmas gift. And then after she passed, I ended up with them. And they're, believe it or not, they're still in tune. They're like 30, 40 years old, 35 years old, 30 years old, something like that. They're still, I didn't have to tune these up. They're perfect tune. So the notes that are in it are a G major, a G pentatonic scale starting on the D. So it's D, E, G, A, B, and then an octave D. And the way I've got it set up here on the keyboard is that I can play it. I've got it set up chromatically, so I can play all the notes on the keyboard. So I set up a low-pass filter, right? So if I bring the low-pass filter all the way up, right, you can hear that it's very bright and very chimey. Let me turn the volume on that up a little. But I wanted to make a little sound designy, so now you have all these different kinds of filters here. BP is bandpass. High pass cuts off the low end, but I like my low pass filter. Now the next thing here is your amp envelope. So the way it comes at default is like this. So I turn the attack so I get a nice sharp attack, but I need a little release. So it is, can anybody tell me what attack, decay, sustain, release, does anybody remember? Does anybody remember what those signify in terms of an envelope? We went over this last semester and a little bit the semester before. Okay, so the attack of a sound is the amount of time it takes to go, you play a note, and the amount of time it takes to go from no volume to full volume. So right here, when I'm playing that note, it's almost instantaneous full volume. So watch what happens when I, let me just, yeah, you could see that. So I move the envelope so I have a slow attack. You can't even hear it. All right, let me see how it fades in a little bit. So okay, so that's attack. Let's not worry about hold. Decay is the amount of time it takes to get from full volume down to the volume of sustain. And the sustain is the volume that the note takes after the decay until you let go of the note. So see how it goes? Pew, right? You can have the attack be really prominent and a very soft sustain. You see that? But it has a little bit of a release. But if I bring the sustain up, you see how it keeps that volume? And then the release is the amount of time it takes after you let go of the note for the sound to go from the sustain level to no level at all, to zero. So attack from 0 to full volume, decay from full volume to the sustain level, and the sustain level is the volume that the note stays at after those first two stages of the envelope until you let go of the note, and then that's the release time. So I could have the release be very short. So that's a bit much. So you find a place where it's nice, where it works. So this velocity sensitivity, doesn't really seem to work well as far as I'm concerned. Now, there's a new, so you guys have been working with low pass and high pass filters that just have a cutoff frequency, right? You're all pretty good with that. This one has something called reso right here. That stands for resonance. What resonance does is it emphasizes the frequency around the cutoff point. So let's say our cutoff point is 500 hertz. You turn up the resonance and it will emphasize around 500 hertz. It'll make that pitch louder. So let's listen to what happens when we crank up the resonance. See, it's adding like an extra overtone in there. Whoops. So you could do some sound designing with this, right? Okay. So let's see if I can remember how to do this properly. So I'm going to make these. Okay, let me just show you these other two. So this is, I've got something called a microbrute. It's a tiny little synthesizer. And I made a bass sound and I sampled it. Right? I left my key range, the full range of it. I made my polyphony 32 voices. I can make the polyphony less to maybe just a few voices. This saves a little CPU, I think. Now I can change the octave. You can transpose it in semitones and you can fine tune. You can't fine tune every individual samples, just the samples as an aggregate whole. And then you have your pitch bend. Let's see if it works. Right, so I've got it going up 2 half steps. It's a whole step. And if let's say I can make that an octave, right? You can change that and set that up however you'd like. Now, you can set up this kind of cool glide right here, or it's also called portamento in other synthesizers. You hear how it's slid up, so I could make it slower. So you could add just a little bit of that, and I've made it legato, so it only plays one note at a time. Right, you can add those. right, by holding down one note. So that's something that you can program in yourself. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this. Now, I could change the timbre of this if I don't like some of that high end. Right? So what you do is you take the sound and you decide, maybe I want to play around with it a little bit. All right, so that's that. And then piano, right? So about 5 years ago, actually right about now, I spent a week in Oakland, California, and was looking at houses out there. We were thinking about moving there. And I'm actually glad we didn't, given what's going on out in California now, what's been going on with fires and stuff since then. And I came across this really cool house in an area called Montclair, Oakland, beautiful area. And in the garage, they had a beat up upright piano. And the whole piano was a whole step lower. So if I played a C, it sounded like a B flat. And I had, I don't know why I had it with me. I can't remember why, but I had a little Zoom video recorder with a stereo mic. And I started playing this piano, and I thought, this would be great to have as an instrument. So I just quickly played a bunch of notes on it. I just tried to be careful that I made the same volume as close as I could on each note. And I recorded maybe 10 or 15 pitches because not every pitch sounded right. So I recorded over like a 3-octave range, the best sounding notes. So I got it back into my studio, and I couldn't tune up, some strings on a piano. Some notes on a piano have 3 strings, and those strings could be a little bit out of tune with each other, like a 12-string guitar, and it sounds like it's chorusing. Well, I tried to make the aggregate pitch be as close as possible. And so I tuned up each note, and I made individual samples out of them. And it's got a lot of character. Right? So I just added a little release to this. I haven't done any filter work, but you can really do some sound design with this here. I had a transpose, right. Okay, so let me turn the master volume on this up a little bit. Oh, it's up all the way. All right, that's a really beautiful pad, and I can add some resonance. So even though this is a free piece of software, with some creativity, you can do some really interesting things, okay? So how does it work? Well, here are I'm going to show you what I know, but here are 2 tutorials. And this is up on our I have this up on our assignment, so you can get to it there. Oh, also, the session for today's class, so you could look at these instruments I made, is right here in this Google Drive. There's a direct link to it. I've made it so that anybody who clicks on this link can download the Pro Tools session. It may have it has contact in it, so just ignore it, and you can delete that track after you've opened it. So any questions, any comments, anything so far?
Actually, I couldn't download our assignment and any other stuff from the Google Drive. I don't know why. I could see it, but I couldn't download it.
Okay, so oh, you're talking about this here?
Yeah, everything.
Huh.
Yeah.
Anybody else have trouble downloading this? Yay.
The link that you gave that's in that document took me to September 14th folder, but not to the August 31st folder with the unedited samples.
Were you able to find them? Okay, so everything is up also on our, oops, wrong, is also up on our, should be up on Dropbox. Here we go. So everything was up on this Dropbox folder, which you should all have access to this as well. All right. So basically, I'm putting stuff up in both places, so that if you can't get it to one place, you can get it to another place.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. I should have made that clear, though. Apologize. All right. So I'm going to do 3. Stereo instrument tracks. And let's do this so you can see what I'm doing at the computer keyboard. And I'm going to, if you've got this set up so that you organize plugin menus by category and manufacturer, which is how we've set up our Pro Tools. And you go here, you could just go to Air Music Technology, and Structure Free is in there. Now, when Structure Free comes up, it comes up with this sine wave. What you can do is right-click on this and remove patch. Now, there are some samples in Structure Free, so if you click here, Structure Free, it's got some, the studio drums are pretty good. So you can use these on a project if you want. And what's really cool is that they've got all these different so you could add the room mics, overhead mics, make the room larger. It's got a talkback mic, which will be a little trashier. And see these blue keys down here? These are all different mixes. So if I click on one of these, it's a nice clean mix, tight and roomy, trashy, back of the room, higher pitch. So you can it's got a nice, this is pretty nice too. Let me. All right, it's got a nice steel string guitar. You could add some reverb to it. So it is useful. It's not like it's unuseful, but they should just have the full version available in Pro Tools at this point. It's really ridiculous that they don't. So how do you create a patch? Well, the first thing you do is you need your samples, right? And what I would suggest you do is you put your folders with your samples into the Pro Tools session folder. So I'm going to load in the Woodstock chimes. I'm going to reprogram that. And the reason it needs to be in this folder is that when you send it to me, you can't save these as preset. You can't save these as presets that you can load in. That's another really horrible feature. But if the samples are in this folder, I can search for the samples and it'll load your project back in perfectly. So let's take these Woodstock chimes and I'm going to open this up and I'm going to, so notice how I've got these labeled with all my pitches here, right? And I'm going to click these and I'm just going to drag these into the browser area here. Import samples as a new part. So right here, you see that all of our samples are imported. And what you want to do here, set root key. It usually says from file. Now, if it says from file, you notice on this column right here, the root key is all C3, which is not what we want. Because if we look at the names, we've named these properly. So if you go from name, and then, do you see right here, prefix and then note? Right, the prefix is Woodstock chimes and then the note. That's the pitch. And then let me make sure that I've done this correctly. So by root key and then I might not do this correctly this time because I'm not completely 100% on top of this, but let me just see what happens if I select fill down. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this and I'm going to do that again. I'm going to try a different, that was an octave too low, right? So let's just prefix and then note, and then I'm going to go fill up. Right, so see how it's moved everything up. So that's not good either. So I think the right thing to do is fill centered. So note, and then fill centered. And there we go. Now our keyboard is all lit up. So basically, right? That is all mapped to the entire keyboard now. Those five samples are mapped to the entire keyboard. All right, and they look to be in the right place also. Now, what's wrong with what could be improved with this sound? The first thing, when you hit a chime, what happens to it?
Decay.
Correct. So what do I need to do to the decay?
Increase the time it takes to
Correct.
volume.
Right. So that's on edit 2. And it's the amplitude envelope. So amplitude has to do with volume. So these are volume and time. And the filter envelope is something different. I don't want to get into that right now. This is enough stuff for you to digest. So we just turn the release up and you play it. That sounds nice. And that sounds about as long as a release would, as the release would be. Now, I don't have a sustain pedal hooked up to this keyboard, but I believe the sustain pedal automatically works with this. You'd have to double check me on that. And then you play around with these other guys. Maybe a little more release. Maximum polyphony is 32. That's fine. And the reason why you want to have a lot of polyphony on this, can anybody think why? Because notes are sustaining, so that's part of your polyphony, right? So if I'm playing something, you see, this is now saying 16 notes are playing, and I'm not playing anything. That's because there are notes sustaining because of the long release we have. Okay? So the polyphony is good. And this is not really a pitch bend kind of a sound. But the next thing we can do is we can leave it like it is, and we need to name it, right? So you just double click here where it says new patch, and you would just title this. So I would title this with stock chimes. Enter. And then that could be done. And then I have to name my track. But you could also do a little sound designing. So let me see what happens with this velocity sensitivity. Okay, so when it's at minus 100, no matter how hard I hit it, it's the same volume. I'm hitting it very softly, and I'm beating on it, right? Now, if I turn it this way, you get some velocity sensitivity. So this is something where you'd have to play and adjust it so that it's comfortable for your playing. So that's one thing you can do, is play around with the velocity sensitivity. The next thing you can do is play around with filters. So let me try a low pass 6. So that means that it's a more, that means like a 24 decibel low pass filter means that the slope is almost like an L shape. 6, it's like a very gentle slope. Every octave only gets attenuated by 6 decibels. With the 24 decibel per octave filter, every octave gets attenuated by 24 decibels. I can show you that in a graph form. Give me 1 second here. So I've got my low pass filter. Right now it's set to 6 decibels per octave, and you see the shape of the curve right here. This is 12. You see how it gets tighter? 18, and then 24 is almost an L shape. So that means it cuts off almost everything below that frequency, the cutoff frequency. So as you're working on this, what I'd like you to do is constantly be saving your session. That's how you'll save this. So I'm going to save my session now. Very simply. Okay, so let me try. Right, just taking a little of the edge off, so it's a little mellower. And that could be your sound. Let me see what happens if I... Okay, so that's a chimes, right? So let's add structure free here. So it can also be found in your instrument. Yes, I've got lots of instruments. I've been acquiring them for 20 years. So, all right, so I'm going to get rid of right, so I'm right clicking up in this area here, and I'm just going to get rid of the patch. I'm going to go back to my session folder, and let's do the micro bass. So I'm going to select all these. So I've selected the top one. I'm holding the shift key down. And I click on the bottom one, and all of them are selected. And notice I've got those named properly. Bringing them in here. And then set root key, prefix note. And you want to fill centered, right? That's what worked best last time. Hit OK. And there we have our nice bass. It's pretty simple, right, to create these instruments. You just have to follow the instructions. And then, little release. And I do want this to be mono. And I want to have a little glide, right? So I have legato. That's a little too much, so I could slow the rate down. Dween, just a real little one. And then if I play it separated, you don't get the glide, but if I hold down the bottom note, right? But if I play it separated, you don't get it. But if I hold down the bottom note and then play this top note, you get a little bit of a slide. This is classic Stevie Wonder bass lines from the 1970s, right? This is the kinds of techniques that he did. And again, before I took this one sound and I did a low pass filter and I crank up the resonance a little bit. Let me do it with a 24. Right, and there it is. Right, you get into Headhunters, Chameleon. Or Parliament Funkadelic, right? If I so that's done, right? See how quick and easy it is to program these things. It's not rocket science. This is not a full-featured sampler, but even within its limitations, you could see that you can make convincing instruments.
Hey, Pete.
Yes.
Did you say that it's Rocket by Herbie Hancock Science?
Pun. You know, Herbie's one of the great geniuses of the 20th and 21st centuries. If you ever get a chance to see his Harvard talks, which I think were last year or the year before, he does 5 or 6 one-hour talks, and it's on the Harvard website. He's so unbelievably great. Just him talking and telling stories and talking about his concepts, and he does some playing. He's just one of the great geniuses of music. We all should try to be as 10th as good as he is, and we'd be something. Okay, and then just have to name this. Whoops.
Professor, I have a question.
Yep.
Go
ahead,
how
Sam.
does the software work if you're using pads like Jeremy Ellis was? Like, does it still map it correctly, or do you need to use like a MIDI keyboard for it to work?
Right. So those pads that he has, they're mapped inside of that box, does all the mapping, right? He works inside of a box, and that box is what's triggering sounds from inside the computer. If you buy pads like Ableton Push or something like that, I'm not sure about Ableton Push, but it's one of two things. Either the pads, you can go inside the software and assign pitches to those pads, right? That correspond with the sounds that you're loading in. Or you can figure out what pitch each pad is assigned to and label your samples so that they go to those pitches. Do you understand what I'm talking about, Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a solution for each thing, but for us, we're just going to be playing these things from the keyboard for our class. Okay, so now let me show you something else too. Give me one sec. What I wanted to show you was another technique which I forgot about. Okay, great. So let's do this. Import audio. And I'm going to copy this in here. One, two, three, four. All right. So do you see how quickly I figured out the tempo of that? Right? Let me show you what I did. And I think we went over this last semester. I double-clicked on this so that it's highlighted. That means that in the timeline up here in the ruler, it's highlighted also. So command, so I play it, 2, 3, 4. So that's 1 bar of music, right? And I've got it set to loop. Loop playback, if you right-click on this right here, you can set it up for loop playback, or you can go to options and set it up loop playback, and here's the key command. So it's Command Shift L, and then Command Shift L will turn loop playback off. So this is 1 bar. So if I do Command I, and that brings up add bar or beat markers. So I want it to go from measure 1 at the start, and I want it to end at measure 2. And then boom, it figures out that it's at 102.1267 beats per second. Okay, that's pretty accurate. Now, if you go to edit, separate clip at transients. And then you can have a pre-separate amount. You might just add just a couple of milliseconds to give yourself a little leeway. Hit OK, and then boom, you see that it's all separated out for you. Forgot to teach you this last week. I apologize. So those are all separate clips now. Or you can go to separate clip at on grid. But that doesn't get you the beginning of the hit. So I'm going to separate this out. Well, let me do it by grid just for right now, and I want to show you something. Separate on grid. Okay. So let's do this. I'm going to do a new mono track, and I'll call this edited drums. And I'm going to do Option Shift, which will copy that down there. Oh, let me make sure I'm in grid mode. Let's switch to this so you can see what I'm doing with my left hand. So if you've got this set up correctly, which is as part of the setup in preferences, oh, it's not here. It's in your Apple preferences. System preferences, keyboard, right here. Do you see how this says use F1, F2 keys as standard function keys? These keys, they make the screen brighter, darker. They turn the volume up, they mute it. But when you have them set up for function keys, then they work inside of Pro Tools differently. So if you want to get them to do volume and brightness, you would hold the function key down right here. And then you would just press these and they would do those functions. But in Pro Tools, I can use that to navigate. So if I look over here at our edit modes, F1 is the shuffle, F2 is slip, F3 is spot, and F4 is grid. So you don't have to move your mouse up there. You can have your left hand here working the keyboard. So I can get this right on the grid. So let's see. So Option Shift click. So you see, I'm just reordering this. So I copy that, pasting that, copying that, pasting that. So if I were to play these two bars, I don't like this one, so I'm going to get rid of that. And maybe I'll put this there. Right, so you can reorder some of those edited things that you've done that you don't want to move to the that you can't program into structure. Hold on, this is the department chair. I just have to message him that I'm teaching right now. Okay, that was Michael Lipsy. Okay, so I just wanted to show you though that other ways to separate out a drum loop, which I forgot to teach you last week. But using the tab to transient is a good technique to develop. All right, so for next week, I want you to make your 4 structure instruments. You're going to save them all in a session, and you're going to send me the session, right? So let's say that I've got So this is, let's say I've done 4 of these structure free, right? I would save that and close it out. And this is the folder. Make sure that your sample folders, before you start working, are in here, in your session folder, okay? Compress your session folder, just like that. And this is what you're going to upload to Dropbox or to Google Drive or wherever you, either one. I'll send out links, or I'll post links up on our Google Classroom. So basically for next week, you're going to take 4. For next week, you're going to take 4 of your favorite sounds that you've edited, and you're going to create little structure instruments with them. Make sure that the tracks are named, the instruments are named, and that the folders that contain the samples are inside of your session folder. You zip up the session folder and you upload it. So that's all that's due for next week. This is going to be a long-term project that's going to be due in about completed in 3 weeks. So this is the second step. The first step was getting your samples together. Typically, I would have had you recording things, but given the nature of what's going on right now, I think that just taking sounds and that I've recorded and editing them is plenty of practice. Is that? Oh, hold on a second. Okay, Huna, I'll read that later. Okay. Right. So for example, Huna just got here from Korea, so she's quarantined for 2 weeks. So if I had you going out to try to record sounds, she can't do that. Right. So typically what I have is the students go out with their phones, or if they've got little hand recorders like a Zoom recorder or anything, and just record sounds and create sampler instruments from them. And that's a great assignment. I love teaching that. This is not time to have people going out indiscriminately and doing stuff. So you're still learning a lot of stuff here. And those of you that have taken Recording Studio Fundamentals, you've fortunately been in the studio to record things. And we will be recording things and passing them around. Like I said, we have recording kits. There seems to be some sort of issue right now with getting students into the building to pick them up. Because for Recording Studio Fundamentals, I couldn't even get students keyboards, MIDI keyboards for this week. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but I'll keep working on it. And but in the interim, we'll be getting stuff done. And that's really the most important thing. You'll still be learning. So let me know if you guys have questions on this.
Yeah, I'm still behind the 8 ball in terms of the first assignment. And this is some of the thing that Huna brought up is the link that's in the document that you published called Audio MIDI 2 83120.
Yes.
So it says save them in a folder titled blah, blah, blah. And you said this is zip and upload here.
And you can't upload it there?
Well, I'm looking for the file samples for editing 83020.
Okay, so hold on a second.
Where is that? I guess I wasn't finding it.
Okay, so let me do it this way. You know, what I would say is if you got an issue like that, would have been good to let me know last week. Okay.
I apologize.
That's all right. So in the syllabus, in the class preferences, I believe, there's a link for how to sign into Dropbox. Okay, so I'm going to send you.
Okay, I see it. Yep.
So I'm going to send you right now, though. Just hold on one second. Okay, so in the chat, I'm sending a link to Dropbox. All right, so you should be able to download those. Those are the samples for editing.
Beautiful. Thank you.
All right, and here we go. And you can, in Dropbox, assignment 1, do 9, 14, 20. You can pop them right into there. All right, like everybody else did.
Got it.
Okay. You know, everybody here has had classes with me before, so they've been doing this for two semesters already, so they've got it down. You know, there was, when we were first starting out, everybody was having, you know, questions about doing this. So once you do it a couple times, it'll be easy. All right. Okay. So what I want to do now is I want to move forward with something else. Now, I might have gone over this over the summer, but I think it's worth going over again. So I want to focus in a little bit more on mixing. Actually, let me close this session. That's not what I'm looking for. All right, let me just fix this. All right, let's take a listen to this. Okay, so this is not something we went over. Okay, so this is a song of mine from my 2017 album titled The Road Home. Forget what the title of this is, to be honest with you. But I want to go through this because I want to talk about arranging and mixing and organizing your sessions. And one of the benefits of teaching online like this is that I can show you stuff that I have in my computer that I can't play at the school computers. So I'm taking advantage of that in the film scoring class, and I'm taking advantage of that here. So let's take a quick look at the timeline. And you see that I've got all of these markers. Intro, pulse, verse 1, pulse 2, verse 2, piano solo, verse 3, and the end pulse. Now, okay. Now, in addition to markers letting you see where the different sections are, they're also memory locations. You access that either by knowing the key command, which is Command and. So it's Command and it's 5 on the numeric keypad. It's not this 5. So if you don't have that to call up this window, then you can just go to the window here and call it up. So you notice that right here it says 1 intro, 2 pulse, 3 verse 1. They're in order. So to navigate my session, and I usually keep this on the second screen so I can see it, especially if I'm doing a film score with 20 markers in it or memory locations. If I want to go to pulse 2, it says the number 4. So the way that works is I hit decimal point, 4, decimal point, and you can see the counter moved me to measure 39, and this became highlighted. If I want to go to verse 3, it's decimal point, 7 decimal point, and I've gone to measure 71. If I want to go to the intro, it's decimal point, 1 decimal point. And this can happen when you're stopped and when you're playing it. So that's handy for navigating. That's really handy for navigating around the session, but it's also really handy when you're mixing. And let me explain why. So you're mixing and you want to make sure that your verses, for example, have a consistent level and they sound similar. They may build and there may be differences of orchestration, but you don't want there possibly to be wildly different volumes. So the way around that would be to play your track. So let's go to verse 1, which is decimal point, 3 decimal point. Play it. Now I'll go to verse 2. Right, verse 3. So as you can see, that's a really good way to jump around into different sections so that you can hear the volume differences. And also you can check your orchestrations to hear, have I made something in the second verse that is different than the first verse? Am I building the song as it's going? So let me go back to doing that again. So if I go, let's go to verse 1. Right, verse 1, now verse 2. So I've added drums, and there's choir. The piano's an octave higher, right? So you can really sort of use it as an aid in composition and arranging as well as mixing and as well as writing to navigate around the different sections. So markers. Markers are really, really, really important. Everybody knows how to make a marker. Is that correct or not correct?
Could you show us again anyway?
Yes, so for the new people. Let's say I wanted to add a marker to measure 137. I navigate to measure 137, and it's as simple as hitting the Enter key. It's tough, right? And then you just name it. Now, so if I name this, I don't know, after song is over. I should capitalize the first letters. Your reference can be bar and beat, or your reference can be absolute. Well, we're in a song with a consistent tempo, so or we're in a song where the form is set. I'm not going to change it or add measures. So I'm going to leave the reference to be bars and beats. If I'm spotting a film, which means that I'm going through the spotting notes that the director and I have gone through, and I'm going on the timeline and I'm placing markers to let me know where action is changing or direction from the film director, I would change this. Let me just cancel that out. I would change this to minutes and seconds, and then see how it's absolute. So that location 10 would always be referenced based on this time, not based on bars and beats, because bar 20 could be at 45 seconds into a song if you're at a certain tempo. But if you change the tempo, bar 20 could be at 60 or 70 seconds into the song. So your tempo will determine where on the timeline bar 20 is in terms of minutes and seconds. With film, it has to be absolute. This thing happens on this frame of action at simply 1 hour, 5 minutes, 37 seconds, and 12 frames, right? So that has to be absolute no matter what the tempo of the music you're writing is. So that's why you would use this. And if you're working in film and mixing film, you want your things to be absolute to the timeline, not to bars and beats and tempos. Okay. So I'm really liking the switching system. It's really helpful, I think. Really, it's helping me out to let you guys see stuff. Okay. So I want to make my tracks. Let me move my memory locations to my other screen. I want to move my tracks and make them larger. Okay, so I'm holding down Control and Option, and I'm pushing the up arrow, and it makes them bigger. And then the down arrow makes them smaller. So that's a good shortcut, and I've taught that before, but I'm just reiterating it. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, the next thing is this. If I want to fit everything into a timeline, so like this much, so I've selected from the beginning basically to about a measure 113. If I hold down these same two and hit F, right, it fits it into the time, it fits it into your edit window. We all know that R, right, so everybody, for the new people, up over here in this upper right-hand corner, you see the letters A to Z. Probably in your Pro Tools, it's grayed out. It should actually be on. It should be clicked so that it's amber. And that's called Edit Keyboard Focus. That means that I can push one key, one letter, and do stuff. So right now I'm pushing the R key to zoom out and the T key to zoom in. That's how I teach everybody to work. So if I want to fit everything in without selecting everything, it's Control Option A. But let's say I want to just fit this area and make that fill up the screen. It's Control Option F. So some really good key commands there. Okay, so memory locations, a couple of key commands. Okay, those are good. All of those things are really will enhance your creativity. Now I want to show you something I don't use. This area right up here. This is called the universe, and it takes up space. And as you can see, it looks like a miniature version of the arrangement. This is really great if you're working on a film and your timeline is 2 hours long. But for what we're doing, I don't need it. So if it shows up on your Pro Tools, right here, there's a upward facing arrow with a little horizontal line. You can just click on that and it will make it disappear. Otherwise, you can go up here and you can get rid of the universe. Now, we went over this a little bit last year, last semester, but over here in my groups, you could see I've got a group called All, and Pro Tools comes with that at default. But I've got drums, pulsing keys, pads, and bass. These are groups. These are instruments that are grouped together. And what I've done with these groups is you could see that in parentheses, they're assigned to a VCA. Drums VCA, pulsing keys VCA, pads VCA, and bass VCA. I love VCA tracks. I am not a recent convert anymore, but maybe about 6 or 7 years. So if you think that I've been sequencing in the computer since 1991 and I've been sequencing since the 1980s, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've added VCAs. So now that I'm using them, I can't think of a time where I wouldn't use them. They're just so helpful. So if you notice, the way that I've got this session organized, another tip for Pro Tools, if you've got a lot of tracks and you can't read, let's say you're set up like this and you can't read what the track names are. So sometimes if I'm scoring a film, I've got 100 or 125 tracks and I can't read the names if I want to see everything in the timeline. I can read these, the tracks list over here. That with the white background and the black letters, I can read that very easily. So if I wanted to, let's say, go to my Mini Moog bass, I could click on it here and you see it becomes highlighted. So then I can easily just find that. So that's just a navigation trick. And to unhighlight that, you hold down the Option key. Hold down the Option key and click on that just like that. All right, so it's highlighted, it's unhighlighted. So notice if I click on it, it just brings up the name. It's still highlighted. To unhighlight, you hold the Option key and click. Now, what the VCAs are good for, let me make all these tracks bigger, is two things. I can use them as an overall volume control for a group of instruments. I can use them to mute a group of instruments. I can use them to solo a group of instruments. But they're also good for those of you that are graduate students and those of you that read music student majors would be Charlie. I think most of you can read music a little bit even, those of you that aren't music majors. What it does is if you look at a score, right, an orchestral score, you have the woodwinds, you have the brass, you have the percussion, and you have the strings. And between each of those groups of instruments, if you look at a score, there's a little space. Those instruments are bracketed together in the score. There's a space, and then the next set of instruments are bracketed together. And that helps you to navigate the score up and down. So for example, with this, I've got my drums color-coded, so I know that they're on the top, And I know that right here are different instruments because they're reddish. And then, you know, these are green, and there's these VCAs. So they separate out the track and they help me to navigate. So let's show you, and for mixing they're great, is that let's say I'm playing this piece. I want to hear the drums. So I just click on the drums VCA. I want to hear the drums and the bass. Right, so now I can hear the drums and the bass together because I've clicked on the bass VCA. I want to hear the piano. And that's really helpful when you're mixing because you want to hear if you want to really know a piece of music. Let's say you're just listening to a Bach chorale, or that you study in harmony. Those of you that aren't music majors, when you're studying theory, to learn harmony, you start out. Well, at Queens College, you start out with something called species counterpoint, but you also work on Bach chorales. And Johann Sebastian Bach took a bunch of melodies, and these are for liturgical services, and he harmonized all of them. And they're unbelievably great for teaching voice leading and harmony. So that would be a soprano, an alto, a tenor, and a bass, right? So they're written all for 4 voices, and you can get everything you need from 4 voices, and that's how you study it. Now, if you really want to study it, when you're practicing, when you're looking at it and analyzing it, right? You look at the chords vertically. One's a C major, there's a G major, there's an A minor, but you listen to the soprano voice and you see how the line unfolds. You listen to the alto voice, you play through it, and you see how the alto voice unfolds. Then you play the tenor voice, and you see how that moves, and the same with the bass. Then you listen to the soprano and the alto together, so that you hear the relationship between the top 2 voices and how they're harmonized. Then you might listen to the soprano and the tenor, and you can hear how the outer voice and one of the inner voices move together and the relationships between the notes. And you can go through all the combinations and study those and get those sounds in your ear and how all those things moved. And that's how you really learn that piece of music. There's a story from an article I read, and I've told this story before, so forgive me if I'm repeating it to you guys. But I read an article reprinted in Musician Magazine probably like 20 years ago. I don't think that magazine's even in print anymore, where John Coltrane was talking about learning a piece of music. And he'd buy a record, and before he even tried to learn the melody, he would listen to it. Just get a background picture of everything, what it sounded like. Listen to it a couple times. Then he'd go to work, and he would listen to the bass over and over again until he could sing every note the bass played from the beginning of the song to the end of the song. Then he'd listen to the drums until he knew every drum fill, the groove, everything. Then he'd and he wasn't muting anything. He was just training his ears and his mind to focus in on the bass, cut through the mix to listen to how that bass fit in with the by itself, and then the bass and the drums together after he listened to the drums, and then the bass, the drums, and the piano. And he would listen and study, right? He'd get the piano, listen to the piano all the way through, and then he'd start focusing on the bass and the piano, the bass, the drums, and the piano, listening to all 3, how they work together, the interplay, who did what, when, in what part of the song, and then he'd start focusing in on the soloists, and he'd learn every note of the soloists, not to play, but in his head so that he could sing them. He'd memorize it. And this would take like a bit of time, and 30, 40, maybe 100 listenings over and over again to a song to study it and internalize it. Well, if that's the way that people that are giants work. That's the way we should work. And so when we're mixing and arranging and writing and working on music, we need to listen to what's happening inside the song. And you do that by playing different combinations of instruments. And this is a great way to do that. So for example, if I wanted to hear the bass, so I solo the bass VCA, and I want to hear my pads. So where's my pads VCA? Here we go. Here's my pads VCA. And so let's listen to all those together. Let's pick a place. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, there's no bass there. Let's go to the end. Right? So you could hear that in this one spot where right here where there was bass in these pads, that sounded great. But let's say I wanted to listen to these pads and the pulsing keys. Right? I'm listening to see if there's anything dissonant, if anything sticks out, how they all fit together. I'm learning my own arrangement. Oh, the bass is still in there, right? Yes. So you can hear how everything fits together. And the VCAs really help you with that. Right? They help you to isolate out different parts of the song, different instrument combinations, and you want to make sure that they're all in harmony. They're all working together in concert to create the aggregate whole that you're looking for. And this is a really big tip that I'm giving you here, and this will transform your mixes. You see that I've got all these plugins and these things. That's all just to make sure that all this stuff works together. Like that. Let's say that I wanted to do my pulsing keys and my piano. I just wanted to make sure that, let's see, where are they playing together? Right here, they're playing together. So when I was playing that solo, I had to adjust what I was playing in my left hand, right? And so as you're playing your instrument and you're adding tracks in, you have to, there's people write stuff, arrangements out on paper, and that's great, but that's just a roadmap. This is the trip that you're on, right? A roadmap is a great way to plan out your adventure, but this is the actual doing of your adventure. You could sit there and write. We went on a cross-country road trip for 2 months in the summer of 2016, and it was unbelievable. And we spent 3 or 4 months planning it out. We had a book with our whole itinerary. We're vegans, so we had to find places that we could eat, like in Montana and in places where so we'd find college towns, right? And we'd be able to get food. And we planned all this out. And the map and the planning, it was great, but it was just a guide. The trip itself was life. It was incredible. So you could write things out on notation, but the creation of the soundstage is the thing, right? It's just like you could study and you could practice, but when you go out and perform, that's the thing, So here we are. I had that pulsing thing going in the keyboards and make sure my left hand wasn't too busy. So it didn't get in the way of that. Okay. So that was quite a bit, I think, to take in at this point. So this is sort of how the class is going to work, I think. So we're gonna go over the lesson, and then I'm going to go into my archives to be able to show you some more advanced stuff that I don't expect you to be able to do, but I want you to start understanding these concepts and maybe incorporating something, in the things that you work on. Do you have any questions on any of this? Yay, nay, have I lost you? Was it boring? Was it horrible?
How do we create those groups that you were showing us?
Oh, okay, sure. Let's do this. Okay, so let me take, these are these pads. All right, so I've selected them, and hold on a second. Let me switch to this scene so you can watch my left hand. Okay, so I'm clicking on the top one. I'm holding the shift key down, and I'm clicking on the bottom one, and they all get selected. You got that? Then
Cool.
Command G, and then you just name it. And that's the basic thing for naming groups. And then over here, these are the tracks that are available for your group, and these are the tracks that are currently in the group. So let's say I wanted to get rid of reface. I highlight it, and I could remove it. And if I wanted to replace it with the cello line, I could highlight that and add it. So you can select tracks, create a group, and then before you actually click OK to create the group, you can edit your selections. And then there are other things that go on, but it's with attributes and globals. But the only other thing you need to know to get started with is to name this extra group or whatever you're going to name this. But make sure your name has something to do with what you're picking. So this would be like pads and cello or something like that. And that would be my pads and cello group. And just click OK, and you see it's right here. So if I were to, and then to unselect these, right, you have to hit Option, and then right here, you have to click on Option and click on these to get rid of it. So to select a group over here, let's see, pads and cello, you got to click on this column here and then highlight it. And you see my cello line, and these pads are all selected now. And notice if I hit S, they all become solo. If I hit M, they all get muted. If I hit record, well, oh, I don't have an input and output. Right, I don't have this set up for recording. So, and then hit Option, click to get rid of it. Okay.
Cool, thank you.
Sure. Don't save. Okay, so you're going to have to go and watch this video of the class again, right? So rather than me going on for almost 3 hours in the class, you're going to have to spend another hour looking at video to go over the structure stuff again. So these classes are not going to be 3 hours long because you're going to have I want to make sure that you don't have 10 hours a week of work, watching a 2-hour video and then doing the assignments. So the class is going to be about 2 hours and 15 minutes. So we're about at an hour and 45 right now, an hour and 50. I'm starting to lose my voice, and I have to teach another class. So I think I'm going to call it a class right now. We went over an incredible amount of material. Everybody's clear on the assignment. You're going to create 4 sampler instruments, and the sampler instruments you're going to make sure before you create the sampler instruments that you pick the 4 sounds that you've edited that you like the best, and you're going to take their folders and you're going to put them in your Pro Tools session folder. So the procedure is you create your Pro Tools session that you're going to program your sampler instruments with. And before you even make instruments, you just open up a session. Then you pick your 4 sounds, the 4 different edits that you did this week that you like, whether it's the chimes and the bass, or whether it's the drum groove, or whatever it is. You're going to take each of those individual folders and you're going to drag them so that they're inside of the session folder. And then you're going to get to work. And then that session folder is what you compress and upload for next week. And don't be afraid to play around with the filters and the envelope to, sound design a little bit if you've done stuff with the chimes. You can, it doesn't have to be an exact recreation of the sound. It can be a little bit played with. So that's basically it. I'm anyway, so you guys have a great week. Some of you I'll see on Wednesday, and okay, I'm just reading a chat. All right, so I will talk to everybody, and if you have any questions, ask me sooner rather than later. So you guys all have a great day and a great week, and I will catch you soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Okie doke.